The white collar of my uniform felt like a noose, tightening every time Ronald looked my way from the bar. It wasn't the heat of the kitchen making my skin itch, it was the weight of his stare, heavy and suffocating, pinning me to the floor of the Gilded Lotus. Ronald didn't look like the man who had spent the morning reminding me I belonged to him. He looked like a god in a charcoal suit, sipping a Manhattan while his crew loitered near the exit like hungry wolves. I had exactly 3 minutes before my shift ended. 3 minutes before he'd lead me to the black SUV outside to finish the conversation he'd started with his fists at dawn. Beneath my pristine white waist apron, my skin was a canvas of secrets he'd painted in blue and black. I glided toward the corner booth, my shadow falling over the only man in Chicago who could survive a war with the Scott Syndicate, Choi Hyun-woo. He was a statue of obsidian and ice, his slicked-back hair and tailored suit signaling a level of power that made the air around him feel thin. My hand trembled as I set the leather-bound bill folder on the table. It was a suicide mission. If he brushed me off, Ronald would kill me for the embarrassment. If he took offense, he'd kill me himself. As I retracted my hand, a small, folded scrap of paper stayed behind, pinned firmly under his tattooed thumb. Help me before he kills me. The Gilded Lotus was a cathedral of deceptive warmth. Golden chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen honey, casting an amber glow that was supposed to mean safety, but tonight, it felt like the lighting of a funeral parlor. To the elite sipping their vintage cognacs, I was just a ghost in a fitted blouse, invisible, silent, and replaceable. But the man sitting before me saw everything. Choi Hyun-woo didn't move. He didn't blink. He was a predator at rest, his eyes wide and brows slightly raised as he stared at the note. He held the paper with both hands, his posture leaning forward, fully absorbed in my desperation. Beside him, a woman with vintage waves and a black dress stared at her phone with chilling detachment, her calm a sharp, terrifying contrast to the lightning strike of tension hitting the table. From the bar, I felt Ronald's gaze sharpen. He was a patient man, but his patience had a body count. He adjusted his cufflink, a silent signal to his men that our time was up. I turned and walked away, my spine stiff and my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't look back at the bar and I didn't look back at the booth. I just waited for the sound of a glass breaking, or the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. I had placed my life in the hands of a monster, betting everything that he would find Ronald's claim on me an insult to his own territory. The restaurant didn't just go quiet, it went cold. The low hum of laughter and the clink of silverware vanished instantly, replaced by a vacuum of sound that made my ears ring. Choi Hyun-woo had stood up, and for the first time in my life, the restaurant was looking at me because they were terrified of him. I moved through the dining room with a ghost's grace, the weight of the leather bill folder feeling like a leaden anchor. Every step toward table 1 was a step away from the life I knew and a step toward a terrifying unknown. Behind me at the mahogany bar, I could feel Ronald's eyes, predatory, possessive, and narrowing as he checked his platinum watch. He was already imagining the feel of my arm in his grip as he led me to the exit. Choi Hyun-woo didn't look up as I approached. He was deep in a low-voiced conversation with the woman beside him, his presence so commanding it seemed to bend the light around him. Up close, the tattoos crawling from beneath his crisp white collar looked like ancient, dark warnings. My heart hammered a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird begging for release. "Your check, sir," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the soft clink of silver and the murmur of the city's elite. I set the folder down with a hand that I forced to remain steady. As I began to retract my fingers, I slid the small, crumpled square of paper from my palm, pinning it directly under his thumb. I felt the heat of his skin, a stark contrast to the icy chill of my own. For a heartbeat the world stopped. Hyun-woo's thumb pressed down on the note. He didn't open it immediately. He simply froze. His conversation died mid-sentence. Slowly, with a deliberation that made my breath hitch, he slid the paper toward him and unfurled it. "Help me before he kills me." The reaction was instantaneous and jarring. This was a man who, by all accounts, had watched empires fall without blinking, yet his composure shattered in a way that felt like a physical blow to the room. His eyes flew wide, his brows arching toward his hairline, and his mouth parted in a sharp, audible intake of air. He didn't just look at the note. He devoured it, his posture snapping forward as if he'd been struck. The effect was contagious. The unshakable boss had been shaken, and like a falling row of dominoes, the restaurant fell into a deafening, unnatural silence. The socialites at the next table stopped their laughter mid-gasp. The sommelier froze with a bottle of Bordeaux half-poured. Beside him, the woman in the vintage waves finally looked up from her phone, her bored expression sharpening into a look of lethal curiosity. She looked at the note, then at me, then at the bar where Ronald was already sliding off his stool, his face darkening into a mask of pure, murderous rage. Hyunwoo's head snapped up. His gaze locked onto mine, not with the cold indifference of a patron, but with the searing intensity of a man who had just seen a flare in the dark. He didn't look at my uniform. He looked into my soul, and for the first time in 3 years I wasn't invisible. I was his problem now. The silence in the Gilded Lotus didn't just hang in the air. It vibrated, a thin glass cord stretched to the point of snapping. I stood paralyzed between two monsters, the warmth of the restaurant now feeling like the inside of an oven. From the corner of my eye, I saw Ronald move. He didn't run, he stalked. The casual elegance he'd maintained at the bar vanished, replaced by the heavy, rolling gait of a man who owned everything he touched. The clink of his heavy rings against the marble bistro tables sounded like a death knell. "Amani," Ronald's voice dropped into the silence, smooth as poisoned honey. He reached the booth, his hand already snaking out to grab my upper arm. "The shift is over. We're leaving. Now." His fingers hadn't even brushed my skin when Hyunwoo moved. It was a blur of black silk and controlled violence. Hyunwoo didn't stand. He surged, his hand catching Ronald's wrist midair with a grip that made the larger man's bones creak. "She said she needs help," Hyunwoo said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a falling mountain. "In my world, Mr. Scott, a plea is a contract. And I've just signed it." Ronald's face contorted, the mask of the gentleman enforcer shattering to reveal the beast beneath. "You're overstepping, Choi. She's mine. You want a war over a waitress." "I want a war over anything that bores me," Hyunwoo countered. He twisted Ronald's wrist, and the sound of a glass water carafe shattering against the floor acted as the starter's pistol. Suddenly the loiterers from the bar weren't just men in suits, they were weapons. 2 of Ronald's crew lunged forward, but they never reached the table. 2 of Hyunwoo's diners rose from a nearby circular booth, their movements synchronized and lethal. The refined atmosphere of the Gilded Lotus erupted into a tactical nightmare. A chair was kicked outward, tripping the first attacker, while a heavy porcelain platter was swung with the force of a mace. Screams of the wealthy elite punctuated the air as they dove under tables draped in white linen. Ronald pulled a snub-nosed revolver from his waistband, his eyes bloodshot with rage, but Hyunwoo was faster. He used the leather bill folder, the very thing that had carried my plea, to deflect Ronald's aim. The shot went wide, shattering a massive crystal chandelier above. Shards of glass rained down like diamonds soaked in fire, slicing through the tension. Hyunwoo grabbed the collar of my uniform, pulling me behind the solid oak frame of the booth just as his men returned fire with suppressed pistols. The soft thud-thud of the rounds was a terrifying contrast to the crashing of plates. "Stay low," Hyunwoo commanded, his eyes tracking the room with predatory precision. He looked at me, a smear of Ronald's blood on his cheek. "You asked for a lion, Amani. Don't look away now that he's hunting." The tires of the armored sedan hissed against the wet pavement, a low rhythmic growl that matched the heavy silence inside the cabin. We had left the Gilded Lotus a smoking ruin of shattered crystal and broken reputations, fleeing through the back alleys while the sirens of the Chicago PD were still miles away. I sat pressed against the leather seat, my breath coming in shallow, jagged hitches, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon gold and cold blue. Beside me, Choi Hyunwoo was a silhouette of terrifying composure. He hadn't loosened his tie, nor had he wiped the spray of Ronald's blood from his cheek. He simply watched the passing skyscrapers, his tattooed fingers interlaced over his knee. When we finally turned into the gates of a brutalist concrete fortress overlooking the dark expanse of Lake Michigan, the heavy iron gates hissed shut behind us with the finality of a tomb. The interior of the estate was an iron sanctuary, cold, minimalist, and impenetrable. He led me into a sprawling study where the walls were lined with monitors flickering with security feeds. He didn't offer me a drink or a seat. He simply turned, his shadow stretching long across the polished floor, and pinned me with a gaze that felt like a physical weight. "My world is built on calculations, Amani," he said, his voice echoing in the vast room. "I do nothing without a reason, and I protect nothing that doesn't belong to me. You disrupted a peace treaty. You turned my dinner into a war zone." He stepped closer, the scent of expensive sandalwood and gunpowder clinging to him. There were a dozen powerful men in that room. "Why me? Why did you hand that note to a monster like Choi Hyunwoo?" I looked at my hands, still stained with the grime of the restaurant floor, then looked up at him. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a new, harder emotion was beginning to take root. I thought of Ronald's relentless, predatory pursuit and the way the world usually looked right through a girl in a uniform. "Ronald is a wolf," I whispered, my voice gaining strength as the words left my lips. "He's cruel and he's hungry, and he has spent years making sure I have nowhere left to run." I took a step toward him, entering the circle of his intimidating presence. I've spent my life watching men like him. I know how they think. And I knew that a wolf doesn't care about the law or the police or a waitress's tears. I paused, looking at the dark, intricate ink on his neck, the marks of a man who had survived everything the world had thrown at him. "I chose you because a wolf only fears one thing. I chose you because only a lion can keep a wolf away." Hyun-woo's expression didn't soften, but something shifted in the depths of his eyes, a flicker of grim respect. He reached out, his thumb brushing the line of my jaw where Ronald's shadow had lingered for too long. "Then you should know," he murmured, "that lions don't keep pets. If you stay in this sanctuary, you stay as part of the pride. And the pride has to hunt." The following week was a masterclass in psychological warfare. From the safety of the Iron Sanctuary, I watched on the wall of monitors as Ronald's desperation turned into a scorched earth campaign. He didn't just want me back. He wanted to bleed Hyun-woo until the cost of my protection became too high to pay. Reports flooded in of a high-end logistics warehouse in the port of Chicago being torched, followed by a series of coordinated raids on Hyun-woo's shell companies that left 3 of his lieutenants in the hospital. Hyun-woo paced the study like a caged predator, his phone vibrating with the constant rhythm of a mounting crisis. His advisors were frantic, shouting over maps and ledger books, their traditional methods of brute force failing to anticipate Ronald's erratic, surgical strikes. They were looking for a war of attrition. Ronald was playing a game of shadows. I stood by the window watching the digital maps of the city flicker. 4 years at the Gilded Lotus, I had survived by anticipating needs before they were spoken, managing the chaotic flow of a 5-star kitchen, and tracking the intricate social hierarchies of the city's elite. I realized then that my professionalism wasn't just a mask, it was a data set. "He's not hitting your strongest points," I said, my voice cutting through the shouting men. Hyun-woo stopped mid-stride, turning to look at me. I walked to the table, pointing to the map of the warehouse district. "He's hitting your transit bottlenecks. Ronald doesn't care about the inventory, he's trying to disrupt your delivery schedule. He knows your contracts have late penalty clauses." The room went silent. The advisors looked at me with a mix of confusion and disdain, but Hyun-woo stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Explain," he commanded. "You're reacting to the fire," I continued, tracing a line across the city's grid. "But you should be looking at the fuel. Ronald uses a third-party courier service to move his enforcers without drawing police attention. I used to see their receipts at the restaurant. If you squeeze their dispatch center here in the West Loop, his invisible army becomes stranded in traffic." I began to break down the logistics of Ronald's operation, translating my years of observing the city's underbelly into a strategic counteroffensive. I wasn't just a waitress anymore, I was an architect of the very shadows that had once hunted me. My mind, honed by the discipline of service and the urgency of survival, saw the patterns they had missed. Hyun-woo watched me, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He didn't see a victim in a uniform anymore. He saw a general. "Get the cars ready," he told his men, his gaze never leaving mine. "We're not just defending anymore. Amani has found us a way to cut off the wolf's legs." The victory in the logistics war should have brought a moment of peace, but Hyun-woo remained restless. He spent the evening watching me, his eyes tracking every movement of my hands with a clinical, unsettling intensity. The air in the sanctuary grew heavy, the golden light of the desk lamps casting long, sharp shadows that seemed to claw at the walls. "Take it off," he said suddenly. His voice was a low vibration that made the hair on my arms stand up. I blinked, confused. "What?" "The necklace, Amani. The gold locket Ronald gave you for your anniversary." I reached up, my fingers brushing the cool metal. I had kept it on out of habit, or perhaps a lingering, subconscious fear that removing it would finalize my death sentence. Hyun-woo stepped into my personal space, his presence an overwhelming wall of heat and leather. He didn't wait for me to comply. His large, tattooed hands reached around my neck, his touch surprisingly gentle as he unhooked the clasp. He laid the locket on a silver tray and picked up a heavy glass paperweight, smashing the gold casing with a single brutal blow. Amidst the twisted metal and shattered porcelain of the locket's face lay a tiny translucent sliver of silicon, a high-end GPS microchip. "He wasn't just hunting you with men," Hyun-woo murmured, his face inches from mine. "He was hunting you with data. You were a beacon, drawing him to every door I tried to lock. He walked to the window, flicking the chip into the dark abyss of Lake Michigan. When he turned back, his expression was void of empathy. The time for protection was over. The time for transformation had begun. The first rule of the jungle, Amani, is that there are no victims, only prey that hasn't learned to bite back yet. He beckoned me to the center of the room, clearing the heavy mahogany table. Ronald knows your heart, he knows your fears, and he knows your habits. To survive him, you must become a stranger to yourself. For the next 5 hours, the sanctuary became a crucible. He didn't teach me how to hide, he taught me how to move through space as a threat. He showed me the pressure points on a human frame, the weight of a compact steel blade, and the cold mathematics of a kill zone. Don't look at the eyes, he hissed, his hand steadying my shaking arm as I gripped a practice weapon. The eyes lie. Look at the shoulders. They tell you where the violence is coming from. As the sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the lake in shades of bruised purple, I felt the last vestiges of the waitress from the gilded lotus wither away. My muscles ached and my spirit was raw, but when I looked in the mirror, the quiet stress in my eyes had been replaced by a cold, flickering flame. I was no longer just a prize to be fought over. Under Hyun-woo's tutelage, I was becoming the weapon that would finally extinguish Ronald's light. The transition from the training mats to the inner sanctum of the family was a shift from physical fire to psychological ice. I found her in the glass-walled solarium, the silent contrast from the restaurant, her vintage-waved hair perfectly in place as she sipped tea that smelled of jasmine and iron. She didn't look up from her tablet, but the air around her felt sharpened, like a razor hidden in silk. My brother thinks you are a weapon, she said, her voice a melodious chime that carried a hidden edge. He sees the way you dismantle a supply chain or a man's balance. But Hyun-woo forgets that a weapon is useless if it doesn't know whose hand it's in. She gestured to the chair across from her. Her name was Hannah, and she was the architect of the Choi dynasty's legitimacy. While Hyun-woo handled the violence, Hannah handled the silence. The bribes, the favors, and the delicate web of alliances that kept the police at bay and the rivals in check. You were a waitress, Amani. You know how to read a room, but now you must learn to read a legacy, she continued, sliding a dossier across the table. It was filled with the names of families, old money and new blood, and the secret shames that bound them to the choice. In this world, a bullet is a final resort because it leaves a mess. A secret, however, is a leash. Hannah spent the afternoon dismantling my understanding of power. She showed me that this silent contrast she had displayed at the restaurant wasn't indifference. It was observation. She had been recording the pulse of the room, identifying who flinched when the glass broke and who looked toward the exits. You must become the eye of the storm, she mentored, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that rivaled her brother's. When the men start shouting and the blood starts spilling, you are the one who watches the shadows. You find the person who isn't reacting because that is your real enemy. As she spoke, I realized why she had been so calm while I slipped the note. She hadn't been oblivious. She had been waiting to see if I had the courage to follow through. She was teaching me the politics of the family, the art of the invisible rule. Ronald is a wolf, Hannah echoed her brother's words, but wolves are easily led into traps by those they think are too small to matter. You are no longer small, Amani. You are the variable he didn't account for. By the time the moon rose, I understood that my transformation was twofold. Hyun-woo had given me the teeth, but Hannah was giving me the mind to know exactly where to bite. I was becoming something more than a survivor. I was becoming an apex predator in a dress. The sanctuary's fragile peace shattered when the video feed flickered to life on the main monitor. It wasn't a strategic strike on a warehouse or a digital threat. It was a grainy handheld shot of the gilded lotus locker room. In the center of the frame, tied to a wooden chair, was Naomi, the young, wide-eyed waitress who had shared her shift meals with me for 2 years. Her face was a mask of terror, her uniform torn at the shoulder. A voice came from off-camera, low and distorted, but I would have known that rhythmic, possessive drawl anywhere. 3 hours, Amani, Ronald said. The lakefront pier. Come alone and she lives. If I see a single suit from the Choi family, I'll send her back to the restaurant in pieces. The screen went black. Hyun-woo stood by the monitors, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. He's desperate, he muttered. He knows he can't break the fortress, so he's trying to break your conscience. I'll send a strike team to the pier, but we have to assume it's a kill zone. I felt the old coldness of the service industry, the ability to compartmentalize panic, surge through me, but it was tempered now by Hannah's lessons and Hyun-woo's fire. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I walked to the tactical map, my finger hovering over the lakefront coordinates. No, I said, my voice steady enough to surprise even Hyunwoo. If you send a strike team, he'll kill her before they touch the pier. He expects me to be the victim and he expects you to be the blunt instrument. We aren't going to give him either. Hyunwoo turned, his eyes searching mine. What are you suggesting? Naomi isn't just a waitress, she's the bait for a trap he's been building for a week, I explained, tracing the secondary access tunnels beneath the pier that I remembered from the city's logistics blueprints. Ronald thinks I'm coming to surrender. He'll have his eyes on the main approach. But while I play the part of the grieving friend at the front, I want your best divers coming up through the maintenance hatches beneath the floorboards. I looked at the weapons locker, my hand reaching for the compact blade Hyunwoo had taught me to wield. I'm going to the pier. I'm going to stand in front of him. But I'm not going there to save myself. I'm going there to keep his eyes on me while you cut the floor out from under him. Hyunwoo stepped closer, his hand resting on the back of my neck, a gesture of both protection and pride. It's a suicide run if the timing is off by even a second. Then don't be late, I replied. I'm done being the girl in the note, Hyunwoo. It's time the wolf learned that the lion isn't the only thing he should have been afraid of. The Gilded Lotus was closed to the public, but the chandeliers remained lit, casting a deceptive honey-colored glow over the empty tables and polished wood. Returning here felt like walking into a dream or a memory of a life I had already outgrown. I wasn't wearing the fitted black blouse or the white waist apron tonight. Instead, I wore a dress of dark silk that clung to me like a second skin, and beneath the fabric, the cold weight of the blade Hyunwoo had gifted me was a constant, grounding presence. The front doors groaned open, and the Chicago wind howled into the foyer as Ronald stepped inside. He looked haggard, his charcoal suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot with a frantic, obsessive energy. He saw me standing in the center of the room, exactly where I used to stand to take orders, and a jagged, terrifying smile broke across his face. I knew you'd come back, Amani, he rasped, his voice echoing off the wood paneling. You always were a creature of habit. You can play dress in their silk, but you'll always be the girl who belongs to me. He didn't see the shadows moving in the balcony above. He didn't see the way the light glinted off the barrels of suppressed rifles positioned behind the velvet curtains. He only saw the prize he thought he had reclaimed. He walked toward me, his hand reaching out, not for my arm this time but for my throat. Naomi is safe, I said, my voice projecting with a coldness that stopped him in his tracks. Hyunwoo's men pulled her from the pier 10 minutes ago. You have nothing left to trade, Ronald. His face contorted, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He reached for the revolver at his small of back, but I didn't flinch. I had learned the rules of the jungle and I knew the lion was already behind him. The kitchen doors swung open with a violent crash. Hyunwoo stepped out, his presence instantly draining the warmth from the room. He didn't say a word, he simply raised a hand. From the shadows, his men emerged, circling Ronald like a pack of hunters closing in on a wounded animal. This restaurant was the site of my greatest humiliation, Hyunwoo said, his eyes locked on Ronald's trembling form. And now it will be the site of yours. You didn't just steal a woman, Ronald. You insulted a territory. Ronald looked around wildly, his finger hovering over the trigger, but he was surrounded by a wall of silence and steel. He looked back at me, searching for the quiet stress he had used to control me, but he found only the steady, lethal gaze of a woman who had finally stepped out from his shadow. I wasn't the bait anymore. I was the trap itself, gilded in gold and waiting for the final snap of the jaws. The golden light of the Gilded Lotus felt different now. It no longer illuminated a victim, but a victor. Ronald lay on the floor, his face pressed against the same plush carpet I had vacuumed 100 times. He wasn't dead. Hyunwoo knew that a quick end was a mercy Ronald didn't deserve, but he was broken, his empire dismantled and his pride severed. The wolf was finally in a cage of his own making, surrounded by men who answered to the lion. Hyunwoo stepped toward me, the silence of the restaurant absolute and heavy. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw where Ronald's shadow used to live. With a slow, deliberate motion, he took the silver tray from a nearby side table and handed it to me. On it lay the signet ring of the Scott Syndicate, stripped from Ronald's hand. The world sees a waitress, Hyunwoo murmured, his voice a low thrum of pride that vibrated through my soul. But I see the only person in this city with the heart to survive me. The restaurant is silent, Amani. Tell them who you are. I looked at Ronald one last time. He looked small. He looked like a memory fading in the sun. I turned away from him, standing in the exact center of the dining room, the emotional and narrative pivot of the world we had just remade. I wasn't the girl who avoided eye contact anymore. My posture was upright, my shoulders relaxed, and the quiet stress that had defined my life had burned away, leaving only a cold, radiant authority. Hannah stepped out from the shadows of the balcony, nodding to me with a rare, sharp smile. She had taught me the politics, Hyunwoo had taught me the fire. Together they had built a throne, but I was the one who had walked through the flames to sit on it. From this moment on, Hyunwoo announced, his hand moving to rest on the small of my back, Amani Rivers does not serve. She rules. The men in the room bowed, a wave of dark suits and lowered heads that rippled through the gilded hall. I looked at the white linens and the crystal chandeliers, and for the first time they didn't feel like a cage. They felt like a kingdom. I was no longer caught between duty and survival. I had mastered both. As Hyunwoo led me toward the heavy oak doors, I didn't look back at the service station or the kitchen. I walked out into the Chicago night, the winter wind no longer a threat, but a herald. Beside the man who had started as a stranger and become my sanctuary, I stepped into the black SUV. The empire was ours, built on a foundation of concrete secrets, and a single note that had changed the world. The waitress was gone. The queen had arrived.